Hi guys, welcome back to Planet Mithril. My name is Mithril, and today I'm back with another War of the Rohirrim painting tutorial, and you've asked for it for a little while, and I'm finally coming in good with my take on how to paint Freca, the Lord of Dunland. A stalwart and imposing figure indeed, unfortunately brought low by one single-handed punch from Helm Hammerhand. This does not, however, mean this model does not deserve all the care and attention to bring him to life for the tabletop. Now, a key part is going to be trying to balance a lot of the darker tones of this model to keep him looking uniform, but also try to bring out all the detail in his areas without him looking the same. A lot of the dark details, the fold, the armor plating, the cloak, all are very dark, very black. So I'll be trying to create some definition there with some different additions to black just to bring out the best over that and keep the model looking visually interesting. Trying to balance that with a lot of the browns, the beiges, and the fur collar in particular, and whilst having the spot color with the undershirt, that whitey grey shirt that sits under his fur trim there, trying to make sure that doesn't overblow the look of the model and doesn't become too stark in contrast. So it's actually quite an interesting exercise in how to balance a model with dark tones, and also trying to create some ferocity over his expression and bring out some of the characteristic details of those Dunland tattoos over his face. He's actually been a really fun model to paint. There's a lot of inherent detail on this, and we'll be using a few different techniques, some edge highlighting and some dry brushing to bring out the best of this model as I possibly can for this tutorial. Once my model was cleaned and assembled, I have decided to prime Freca using Citadel Mechanica Standard Grey Undercoat. Brush is ready, guys. Let's get painting. Freca's face and hands are being given a base coat using Bugman's Glow. His greasy hair and beard is being given a base coat using a 1-to-1 mix of Rhinox Hide and Abaddon Black. A small area of shirt showing over his top half is being base coated using Grey Seer. His fold and all the armor plating damaged front and over his forearms, and base coating now with a 3-to-1 mix of Abaddon Black and Nagaroth 9. His cloak is now being base coated with a 2-to-1 mix of Abaddon Black and Storm Vermin Fur, applied with a few thinner coats for a nice, smooth finish. The fur trim at the top of his cloak is now being base coated using dried bark. Any and all straps and belts now I'm picking out using Rhinox hide. His boots and the strapping around his legs now I'm base coating using Steel Legion drab. His brooch and the hilt of the sword are being picked out now using Retributor armour. There are more gold details I'll be tackling later, but after finishing the main areas of armour. His necklace is being picked out with Runelord brass. And finally, the grip of the sword is being painted in using Doomball brown. Freca's face and hands now are being shaded using Reikland Flesh Shade, slightly diluted with Lamia Medium. His armour, cloak, hair, beard and shirt now are all being shaded uniformly using some slightly diluted Null oil. Finally, the fur collar, all the belts, gold detailing and leg strappings are being shaded using diluted Agrak Surf Shade. The first step is to build in the basic shape and structure of Freca's face and hands, using a 1-to-1 mix of Bugbear's Blow and Cadian Flesh Tone, leaving the Reikland Flesh Shade showing in the recesses, particularly around the frowny brow lines. This is being built up further using pure Cadian Flesh Tone. You can see I'm further defining the scowl on his face and expression over his forehead, whilst also creating some tension and definition over the balled up hands. The first highlights are being applied now using a 1-to-1 mix of Cadian Flesh Tone and Kislev Flesh, trying to be more targeted and precise over the sharper details to put as much detail out of his expression as possible. An extreme edge highlight is now being applied using pure Kislev flesh. Literally focus on the knuckles, cheekbones and absolute edges of his brow lines. Now to bring a little bit of colour and rage back to Freca's complexion, I'm applying a glaze using some heavily diluted Caribou Crimson, letting this stain the cheeks slightly and forehead. He's a very angry man after all. His eye recesses are being filled in now using Abaddon Black, and finished off with 2 dots of padded witch flesh as per usual. I'm also carefully picking out his snarly teeth now using Ulthuan Grey. The freehand Dunland tattoos I'm carefully inlaying now using Dark Reaper. These amount to basically an elongated V coming in from his temples and a spiral over his cheeks. For more precise detailing, make sure you have a reference picture to hand as I did. You can then apply a quick highlight to these if you wish now, using Araman Blue. With his greasy, lanky hair and beard already shaded, I'm going back over all the hair now, separating out and getting the structure in place using pure Rhinox hide, leaving the shade showing in the recesses. As he's obviously getting on a bit, the stress of being a slightly more aged Lord of Dunland is going to be greying out his hair a bit. I'm doing this quite simply by just adding some Dawnstone into the Rhinox hide mix used previously, starting at a rough 2:1 ratio mix. I'm increasing the amount of Dawnstone in the mix as I continue building up the highlights over the hair and beard. With more grey in the mix, you can see how I'm focusing more on the tips of the hair, the crest around his scalp, and any more prominent curls. The final highlight stage is quite simply a dot highlight using pure Dawnstone, which is just being applied around his hairline and the very tips of the beard and hair itself. This just reinforces the fresh new grey hair coming through at the roots and the colour washing out of the older, longer hair. When you're happy with how this is looking, I'm just applying a light glaze using some heavily diluted Agrax Earthshade. The undershirt now is getting a layer using a 1:1 mix of Grey Seer and Ulthuan Grey, leaving the null showing in the grooves between the striping. This layer helps the transition from the base coat through to the later highlights blend a little bit better and not appear quite as stark. The undershirt now is getting a second layer using Ulthuan Grey, defining more the shape of Freca's body underneath the shirt and the lining and material itself. The highlight is now being applied to the edges of the shirt texture using pure white scar. You want a nice, controlled, thin lines here as much as you can. I'm applying another glaze to the shirt this time using heavily diluted non-oil. Now to tackle those armoured areas. Now this can be challenging as they're inset against the details which are going to be gold later, but will definitely benefit from some careful application. I'm beginning by lifting the base tone of the armour and separating the material folds of the fold a little bit more now with a 1-to-1 mix of Abaddon Black and Naggaroth Night. Not enough to be purple, but by leaving the null around the edges of the soon to be gold helps create some really nice subtle definition. For the next layer, I'm going to be adding in some Dawnstone to the overall mix. This just helps blend the material and armour plating in a little bit more to the following highlight stages. Although you can jump straight to those if you wish here, I'm just adding a few interim steps to soften the transition. You can see how I'm framing more of the inner segments of the armour plating and further defining the material folds. I'm now moving to a highlight using pure Dawnstone over the armour in particular and being much more targeted as I want some really precise line work to frame all these inner armour plating segments. Final stage is to apply an extreme edge highlight to the armour and uppermost defined folds of cloth using Administratum Grey. His long flowing cloak has a really well defined texture, so this will be a really nice easy stage. To begin with, a blocking layer is being applied with a 2-to-1 mix of Storm Vermin Fur to Abaddon Black, leaving the shade showing in the recesses and getting guidelines in place for the main shape of the cloak. Building this up to a layer using pure Storm Vermin Fur. You can see how I'm further defining the flow of the material folds, creating movement as the wind whips through the cloth. Now I'm applying a highlight using a 1-to-1 mix of Storm Vermin Fur and Ulthuan Grey, and further defining the most prominent folds of the cloak. You can add more Ulthuan and highlight further if you wish, but I feel that would end up with the cloak looking too bright and too stark contrast against the other more darkened areas on the model. A glaze is then being applied to the cloak using heavily diluted Agrax Earthshade, just to tie all the layers and highlights together. I'm defining the third trim now by carefully applying a layer using Gawthorpe Brown, and this is being applied individually to every strand of fur. Why, I hear you ask? Well, I personally find that the following dry brush stages really benefited from having a slightly more targeted layer to the build off after the shading stage. You can of course dry brush this in if you want, it's by no means gospel. With the main body of fur texture now in place, I'm starting to highlight by applying a light dry brush of Baneblade Brown over the top, going against the grain of the fur and using the smaller dry brush just to avoid clipping any of those finished areas. A second lighter dry brush is now being applied using Karak Stone. You can see how the texture of the fur has really come through thanks to that little bit of extra time we spent on the first layer stage. Finally, another glaze using heavily diluted Agrax Earthshade is being applied just to tie all the dry brushing together and soften the blend a little bit more. The belts and straps now get an extreme edge highlight on the upper and lower edges using Gawthorpe Brown. I'm applying a blocking layer to the boots and main body of the leg strappings now with a 1-to-1 mix of Steel Legion Drab and Talon Sand, leaving the Agrax Earthshade showing in the recesses between the straps and recesses of the shoes. A second layer now is being applied using pure Talon Sand, further defining the shape and texture of the strappings and the outer shape of the boots. These are now all getting an extreme edge highlight using a 1-to-1 mix of Talon Sand and Screaming Spell, applied much in the same way as the other belts and straps have been highlighted. Another tied together glaze is being applied once finished using, once again, some heavily diluted Agrax Earthshade. I'll just finish up with the extra gold details and metalwork. The outline of the armour plating over his front and forearms and the rivets across the length of his belt are being carefully picked out using Retributor armour. All the gold detailing now is being given a layer using Auric Armor Gold. These are now being given a targeted shade using some slightly diluted Druchii Violet. The Extreme Edge highlight can now be applied to the edges and upper curves of the gold trims using Stormhost Silver. Any extra buckles and rivets are carefully being picked out using iron hand steel. And finally, the outer ridges of the pommel are being hit with a quick highlight of tusk or fur. The Lord of Dunland is now finished and ready for his long, prosperous life in Middle-earth media. Surely nothing could happen to cut the rich lore potential of this character short, right? A ferocious and imposing figure indeed to stand at the head of your hordes of Dunland warriors, ready to lay siege to the Kingdom of Rohan. For basing tips, please head over and check out my 5-minute bases playlist. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Make sure you never miss a video upload by hitting that bell to get notifications of when we go live. Thank you so much to all our patrons for continuing to support the channel. Don't forget you can support over there for as little as £1 a month. Absolute no obligation. I'm just doing my job and I'll get shouted at if I don't. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed. And as always, take care and happy hobbying. Bye guys.